Flappers, feminists, trendsetters, and fashion icons. It's impossible to talk about the 1920s without talking about the iconic flapper. These beautiful young women had bobbed hair, dramatic makeup, and short dresses. They were fun, fabulous, and fashion-forward. Flappers also smoked, drank, and stayed out all night and rode in cars with men. Now, their actions are tame, but at the time, flappers pushed boundaries. Women lived the high life, but they also changed the way women were looked at in society. They were feminists, trendsetters, and fashion icons. No matter how you look at it, the world today would look very different if it wasn't for flap. Women's roles during the Victorian era. Before we can understand what a flapper is, let's talk about what she isn't. During the Victorian era, which lasted from 1837 to 1901, gender roles were strict. Women had a very limited and specific role within society. According to an article about the lives of Victorian women written by Charles Peachtree, and I quote, "From infancy, all girls were born above the level of poverty and had the dream of a successful marriage before their eyes, for by that alone was it possible for a woman to rise in the world." End quote. Women spent their entire young lives preparing to be a perfect wife. A woman was expected to be feminine, innocent, and modest to meet a proper husband. Victorian women wore tight corsets and giant dresses. These garments created an hourglass figure while limiting her movement and making her look modest. The Victorian woman was defined only by her household skills and shy attitude. Servants were expected to complete household tasks. The husband paid for the house. Her milky white skin and white gloves signified that she never did manual labor like sewing or mending. A new era begins. The 20th century was a brand new era. The Edwardian era replaced the Victorian era. Societal rules began to loosen. Men and women had free time thanks to the invention of the automobile and an economic boom. Soon, everyone was taking trips to the shore, swimming in the ocean, or traveling to other cities. Women suddenly became more active in society. They played sports like golf and tennis. They were even allowed to compete for the first time in the 1900 Olympic Games. The ideal of beauty during this time period was no longer a modest woman. Instead, it was a healthy, carefree young woman who was athletic and social. This was shown by the Gibson Girl, who appeared in a series of illustrations by Charles Dana Gibson in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Strikingly beautiful, she wore her long hair piled atop her head. She went to the theater and played popular sports. The Gibson Girl was the feminine standard of beauty until the start of World War I. Before the 1920s, another important event took place. The 19th Amendment was ratified after decades of agitation and protests. Women finally could vote. This was another step toward equality for women. After the end of World War I, people became more impulsive. Because so many men had endured a close brush with death during the Great War, they wanted to live life to the absolute fullest when they came home. Popular activities included dancing, jazz music, and drinking alcohol. Women became more active in society. Still, there were certain rules that they were expected to follow. Women were still expected to live a modest life. Keeping up a proper image required long hair and effortless grace. Flappers rejected these old-fashioned notions. Just like the soldiers that returned home from World War I, they also wanted to live life full of excitement. The flapper lifestyle. Writers have said the flapper was, quote, "a somewhat foolish girl, full of wild surmises, and inclined to revolt against the precepts and admonitions of her elders." End quote. Flappers completely rejected usual beauty standards. Heavy makeup was stylish. Short bob hairstyles replaced long hair. Flirting and petting was popular. Fast-talking flappers rejected old femininity. They decided to live life on their own terms. The message behind flapper fashion. Flappers were famous for their fashion. For the first time in history, women weren't wearing long dresses that covered them. Flappers wore dresses with a hemline that extended to the middle of the calf. In the 1920s, this was shocking. Flappers wanted dresses that they could move freely in. Their clothes also became far less structured and no longer emphasized their feminine figure. Coco Chanel popularized this androgynous garçon look in France. Rejecting feminine silhouettes symbolized the fact that women were equal to men.